My name is Marcus Donovan, and the day I saw my mother's ring on that maid's finger, my entire world stopped spinning. But to understand why that moment shattered me so completely, you need to know where I came from, what I promised, and how far I'd fallen before I rose to become one of the most feared men in Chicago's underworld. This isn't a story about redemption in the way you might think. It's a story about a promise made by a terrified 8-year-old boy, a promise I thought I'd broken beyond repair, and the woman who never stopped believing I'd keep it. I was born in the south side of Chicago in 1985, in a neighborhood where gunshots were as common as birdsong and where hope died before it had a chance to grow. My mother, Sarah Donovan, was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, though I'm sure poverty and hardship had stolen some of that beauty before I was old enough to remember her any other way. She had these warm brown eyes that could make you feel safe even when the world outside our door was anything but, and hands that were always rough from cleaning other people's houses, but somehow still felt gentle when she touched my face. My father, if you could call him that, was a ghost. As he left when I was 3, walked out one morning to buy cigarettes and never came back. Classic story, right? So classic it's almost boring, except when it's your story, when it's your mother crying quietly in the bathroom at night thinking you can't hear her. It's anything but boring. We lived in a 2-room apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that should have been condemned. The walls were so thin you could hear Mrs. Patterson next door arguing with her boyfriend every single night, and the roaches were so bold they'd walk across the kitchen counter in broad daylight like they owned the place. Maybe they did. We certainly didn't own anything. My mother worked 3 jobs, cleaning houses during the day, working at a laundromat in the evening, and sometimes taking night shifts at a diner on the weekends. I barely saw her, and when I did, she was exhausted, moving through our apartment like a ghost herself, trying to smile for me, trying to pretend everything was fine. School was a nightmare for different reasons. I was small for my age, skinny, with clothes that never quite fit right because they were always hand-me-downs or thrift store finds. The other kids knew poverty when they saw it, could smell it on you like blood in the water, and they circled accordingly. I got into my first fight when I was 7 with a kid named Devin who kept calling my mother a whore because she cleaned houses in the nicer neighborhoods. I didn't even know what the word meant, but I knew it was bad, knew it from the way the other kids laughed, and I hit him. Got suspended for 3 days. My mother didn't yell at me when the school called her at work. She just looked at me with these tired, sad eyes and said, "Baby, I know it's hard. But you can't let them make you into something you're not. You're better than this neighborhood. You're better than their words. Promise me you'll remember that." But I wasn't better. How could I be? I was just a kid trying to survive in a world that seemed designed to break people like us. The real turning point came when I was 8 years old, on a Tuesday afternoon in March that started like any other day and ended with my entire life changing. I came home from school to find our apartment door slightly open, which was strange because my mother was always paranoid about locking it. I pushed it open slowly, calling out for her, and that's when I heard the crying. Not the quiet, dignified crying she did in the bathroom. This was different, raw, broken. She was sitting on the floor of our tiny kitchen, and I'll never forget the image as long as I live. She was still in her cleaning uniform, this awful blue and white thing she wore to the houses she cleaned, and she had one hand pressed against her chest and the other covering her mouth, and she was just sobbing. On the table in front of her was an eviction notice. We had 30 days to come up with 3 months of back rent, money we absolutely did not have, or we'd be on the street. I stood there in the doorway, 8 years old, watching my mother fall apart, and something inside me broke. Or maybe something inside me hardened. I'm still not sure which. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do. This story gets more intense and you won't want to miss where it goes. Drop a comment below with your name and what city you're watching from. I want to know this story is reaching people who understand what it means to come from nothing. My mother looked up and saw me standing there, and she tried to pull herself together, tried to smile through the tears, but it was too late. I'd seen her completely broken. She wiped her face and said, "It's okay, baby, mama's going to figure it out. I always do right." But I could hear the lie in her voice, could hear the desperation, and I knew we were in trouble, real trouble. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay on the thin mattress we shared in our bedroom, listening to her breathe, and I made a decision. I was going to help. I was going to save us. I was 8 years old and had no idea how, but I was going to do it. The next day after school, instead of going home, I started walking through the neighborhood looking for work, any kind of work. I asked at the corner store if they needed help stocking shelves. I asked at the barber shop if I could sweep hair. I asked at the liquor store if I could take out trash. Everyone said no. I was too young, too small, too whatever. I was about to give up when I walked past a group of older boys standing on the corner near the abandoned lot on 37th Street. I recognized one of them, a kid named Jerome who was maybe 16 who lived in our building. He saw me walking past and called out, "Yo, little man, what you doing out here? Your mama know where you at." I should have kept walking. I should have gone home, but I was desperate, and desperation makes you stupid. I walked over and said, "I need to make money. You know anybody hiring?" The boys looked at each other and laughed, not mean laughter, but the kind of laughter that says you're cute for being so naive. Jerome squatted down to my level and said, "Little man, ain't nobody hiring 8-year-olds for real jobs. But I tell you what, you want to make some money? I got something you can do. Easy work. Just deliver some packages for me, $10 a package. You could make $50, $60 in an afternoon." I knew what he was talking about. Even at 8, I wasn't that naive. I'd seen enough to know that packages on corners meant drugs, meant danger, meant things my mother would kill me for being involved in. But I thought about that eviction notice, thought about my mother's tears, and I said, "Okay, what do I gotta do?" And just like that, I stepped onto a path that would define the next 25 years of my life. Jerome started me small, simple deliveries to known customers, people who wouldn't mess with a kid. I'd take a package to an address, give it to whoever answered, and they'd give me money. I'd bring the money back to Jerome, and he'd give me my cut, $10, then 20, then 50. The money added up fast, and within 2 weeks I had $300 hidden in a shoe box under our bed. The hard part was explaining to my mother where the money came from. I told her I'd been helping old Mrs. Chen at her convenience store, stocking shelves and taking out trash after school. My mother was so exhausted, so overwhelmed with her own work and stress that she wanted to believe me, needed to believe me. She took the money with tears in her eyes and said, "Marcus, baby, you didn't have to do this. I'm supposed to take care of you, not the other way around." But I could see the relief on her face, could see the weight lifting just a little bit, and I told myself I was doing the right thing. I was helping, I was saving us. For a while it worked. I kept delivering packages, kept bringing home money, and my mother used it to catch up on rent, to buy groceries, to keep us afloat. She never questioned it too hard, and I became a better liar. But the streets have a way of escalating things, of pulling you deeper before you realize what's happening. After a few months, Jerome asked me if I wanted to make more money. Bigger deliveries, bigger risk, bigger reward. I was 9 years old by then, and the money had become like a drug itself. I needed it. We needed it. So I said yes. The new deliveries were different. I was taking larger packages to scarier people, to houses where I had to knock 3 times and wait for someone to check through the peephole before they'd open the door. I saw things no 9-year-old should see. People so high they couldn't stand up straight, houses filled with guns and cash, men with eyes that looked dead even though they were still breathing. One night I was making a delivery to a house on 42nd Street and everything went wrong. I knocked on the door, did the signal, and when the guy opened it, I saw another man behind him pulling out a gun. Before I could even process what was happening, there were shots, loud cracks that made my ears ring, and I ran. Ran faster than I'd ever run in my life, the package still clutched in my hands, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would explode. I made it 3 blocks before I collapsed in an alley, gasping for air, crying, terrified. That's when I realized I was in over my head, way over my head, but I couldn't stop. We needed the money. My mother needed the money. So I went back to Jerome the next day and delivered the package like nothing had happened. He looked at me different after that, with respect, like I'd passed some kind of test. And maybe I had. The years started to blur together. I went from 9 to 10 to 11, getting deeper into the life, making more money, becoming known in the neighborhood as Jerome's little runner, the kid who was reliable, who didn't ask questions, who got the job done. My mother still thought I was working at Mrs. Chen's store. Mrs. Chen, bless her heart, covered for me whenever my mother asked, probably because she knew what I was really doing and felt sorry for us. I was 12 when Jerome got arrested, big raid on his operation, and suddenly I found myself without a boss. But I'd made connections by then, new people, and it didn't take long before I was working for someone else, then someone else, moving up the chain slowly but surely. My mother's health started declining when I was 13. She'd been coughing for months, this deep, rattling cough that shook her whole body, but she wouldn't go to the doctor because we didn't have insurance and she couldn't afford to miss work. By the time I convinced her to go to a free clinic, they told her she had advanced pneumonia and possibly something worse, possibly tuberculosis, and she needed to be hospitalized immediately. But hospitalization cost money, serious money. Money we didn't have even with what I was bringing in from my street work. I remember sitting in that clinic's waiting room, my mother pale and struggling to breathe, and the doctor telling us she needed at least $5,000 for treatment, maybe more. $5,000 might as well have been 5 million. I was making decent money for a 13-year-old in the streets, but not that kind of money. Not that fast. That night I went to see a man named Vincent Cross, someone I'd heard about but never dealt with directly, one of the bigger players in the South Side operation. I told him my situation, told him I needed $5,000 and I'd do whatever it took to earn it. Vincent looked at me, this 13-year-old kid trying to act tough, and he said, "You know what you're asking for. You know what kind of work earns that kind of money. You ready for that?" I said yes before I even knew what I was agreeing to. Turns out I was agreeing to my first real job, not delivering packages, collecting debts. Specifically, collecting a debt from a man who owed Vincent's organization $15,000 and had been avoiding payment for months. Vincent gave me an address and a baseball bat, that's it. No instructions beyond, make him understand we're serious. Get my money or make him blood trying. I was 13 years old, holding a baseball bat, standing outside an apartment building in a neighborhood I didn't know, about to do something that would change me forever. I knocked on the door. A man answered, maybe 40 years old, unshaven, smelling like cheap whiskey. When I told him why I was there, he laughed. Actually laughed, called me a child, told me to run home to my mother. So I hit him, swung that bat right into his knee, and he went down screaming. I hit him again. And again. I didn't stop until he was crying, begging, promising he'd have the money by tomorrow. Then I left, walked out of that building with blood on my shoes and my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the bat. I threw up in an alley 2 blocks away, violent heaving sobs, my body rejecting what I'd just done, but I'd done it. And when I went back to Vincent the next day, the man had paid. All 15,000. Vincent gave me my 5,000, looked at me with something like approval and said, "You got potential, kid. You got the stomach for this. That's rare. Most people can't cross that line. But you did it for your mama. I respect that. You need more work. You come see me." I took the money, paid for my mother's treatment, and told her I'd borrowed it from Mrs. Chen. Another lie, but the lies were piling up so high I couldn't see over them anymore. My mother got better, thank God. The treatment worked, and within a few weeks she was back on her feet, back to her jobs, back to being the woman who raised me with love and hope despite everything. But I was different. Crossing that line, hurting that man, I'd changed something inside myself, hardened something. I kept working for Vincent, kept collecting debts, kept doing things that would have horrified my mother if she'd known. The money was better now, much better, and I made sure we never got behind on rent again, made sure there was always food in the fridge, made sure my mother could see a doctor whenever she needed to. I told myself I was doing it for her, for us, that it was worth it. When I was 14, my mother did something that broke my heart all over again. She bought herself a ring. Not expensive, just a simple silver band with a small blue stone that she found at a pawn shop for $30. But to her, it was everything. She wore it every day, this symbol that she'd made it, that we'd made it, that we weren't drowning anymore. She'd hold up her hand sometimes and look at it and smile, and I knew what she was thinking. She was thinking about the life she'd wanted, the life she'd dreamed of before my father left, before poverty ground her down. That ring was hope made metal. One night she was particularly tired, sitting at our small kitchen table after a long day of cleaning houses, and she looked at me with those warm brown eyes and said, "Marcus, baby, come here, I want to tell you something." I sat down across from her and she took my hands in hers and I could feel how rough her skin was, how much she'd sacrificed. She said, "I know I'm not always here. I know I work too much, that I'm tired all the time, that I'm not the mother you deserved. But I want you to know something. Everything I do, every house I clean, every dish I wash, it's all for you, so you can have a better life than this, so you can go to college, get a real job, be something more than what this neighborhood says you have to be. Promise me, Marcus, promise me you'll make something of yourself. Promise me you won't let this place define you." She slipped off her ring, that cheap little piece of silver and glass, and she pressed it into my palm. "Keep this," she said. "When you're successful, when you've made it out of here, I want you to give this back to me. It'll be our symbol, our promise, that we made it together, okay?" I was 14 years old, already so deep in the streets that I couldn't see daylight anymore, and I was holding my mother's ring, her symbol of hope, and I lied right to her face. I said, "I promise, Mama, I'll make you proud. I'll make something of myself. I'll get us out of here." She smiled, tears running down her face, and she hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. And I felt like the worst person in the world because I knew even then that I was already broken, already lost, already someone she wouldn't recognize if she knew the truth. The next 4 years were a masterclass in survival and moral compromise. I kept my mother's ring in my pocket every single day, this constant weight against my thigh, a reminder of the promise I'd made and the person I was pretending to be. By the time I was 16, I wasn't just working for Vincent anymore. I was becoming indispensable. See, I had something a lot of the older guys didn't have. I was smart. School had always come easy to me despite everything else, and I'd figured out early that intelligence was a weapon in the streets just like a gun or a knife, maybe even more effective. I started keeping books for Vincent, tracking debts, managing accounts, making sure money flowed the right way. Vincent noticed, started trusting me with more responsibility, more information, more power. My mother still had no idea. I'd gotten so good at the double life that I could switch between street Marcus and home Marcus without even thinking about it. At home, I was her good boy, the one who was going to go to college, who did his homework at the kitchen table, who talked about becoming a lawyer or a businessman. On the streets, I was someone else entirely. Someone harder. Someone capable of things that would have disgusted the woman who raised me. The cognitive dissonance should have torn me apart, but humans are remarkably adaptable creatures. We can justify almost anything if we believe the ends justify the means, and I believed. I believed every dollar I made in blood and fear was worth it because it kept us fed, kept us housed, kept my mother from crying on the kitchen floor ever again. When I was 17, Vincent called me into his office, a back room at a restaurant he owned on the South Side, and told me he was promoting me. Not just to collections anymore. He wanted me to manage an entire territory, a 6-block area that included drug distribution, protection rackets, and loan sharking. I'd have my own crew, my own cut, my own responsibilities. I'd also have my own risks. Territory management meant dealing with rivals, meant violence, meant potential prison time if things went wrong. But it also meant serious money. The kind of money that could change everything. I said yes without hesitation. I was 17 years old and running a criminal empire in miniature. My mother thought I was working part-time at a mechanic's shop. The ring stayed in my pocket, growing heavier every day. Sometimes I'd take it out late at night and look at it, this cheap little thing that meant everything, and I'd wonder what my mother would think if she knew the truth. Would she still want me to give it back to her when I'd made it? Would she still believe I was destined for something better? Or would she look at me the way I'd started looking at myself in the mirror, with disgust and disappointment and the knowledge that I'd become exactly what she'd begged me not to become? I'd put the ring back in my pocket and tell myself it didn't matter. I was providing for us. That was enough. It had to be enough. High school graduation came and went. My mother cried with pride, took pictures with a disposable camera she'd saved up to buy, told everyone in our building that her son was going to college, going to be somebody. I'd applied to a few schools to keep up the appearance, even got accepted to a couple of state universities, but I had no intention of going. How could I? I was making more money in a month than those degrees would earn me in a year. Besides, Vincent needed me. The operation needed me, or at least that's what I told myself. The truth, if I'd been honest enough to admit it, was that I'd become addicted to the power, to the respect I got on the streets, to the fear in people's eyes when they realized who I was. I was somebody in this world, even if it was the wrong world. I told my mother I was deferring college for a year to save money. She was disappointed but understood or thought she understood. I got a legitimate job, sort of, working at a used car dealership that Vincent owned, which gave me a cover for the money I was bringing in and kept my mother from asking too many questions. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I was expanding operations, bringing in more revenue, making Vincent and myself richer every month. By the time I was 19, I had more cash hidden in my apartment than my mother had made in her entire life. I bought her things, nice things, told her I was getting sales bonuses at the dealership. She'd protest, say it was too much, but I could see how happy it made her to have a warm coat that didn't come from a thrift store, to have groceries without checking every price, to have a little bit of security for the first time in her life. Then everything fell apart. Vincent got arrested on federal charges, big conspiracy case that had been building for years. Racketeering, drug distribution, money laundering, the whole alphabet soup of federal crimes. He went down hard, and when the feds finished with him, he was looking at 25 to life. With Vincent gone, his organization fractured. Lieutenants started fighting over territory, over product, over the money that was suddenly up for grabs. I was 20 years old, relatively young in the game, but I'd been smart, had built relationships, had proven myself capable. When the dust settled after 6 months of violence and chaos, I found myself in control of a significant portion of what had been Vincent's empire. I hadn't planned it, hadn't even wanted it exactly. But power abhors a vacuum, and I was there to fill it. Subscribe to our channel if this story is gripping you. We've got so much more to cover, and the twist coming will blow your mind. Drop your name and city in the comments. I want to build a community of people who understand these kinds of stories, who have lived them or know someone who has. The next 5 years were a blur of money and violence and moral compromise on a scale I couldn't have imagined when I was that 8-year-old kid delivering packages for Jerome. I built an empire, a real one. Drugs, obviously, that was the foundation, but I diversified. legitimate businesses that laundered money and provided cover. Real estate buying up properties in neighborhoods I'd grown up in. Nightclubs, restaurants, construction companies. I employed hundreds of people, some of whom had no idea they were working for a criminal organization. I became Marcus Donovan, successful young entrepreneur, philanthropist who gave back to the community, the guy who'd pulled himself up by his bootstraps and made something of himself. My mother was so proud. That was the worst part. She'd see articles about me in local business publications, see me cutting ribbons at new restaurant openings, see me giving speeches at community events, and she'd cry with joy. "You did it, baby," she'd say. "You kept your promise, you made something of yourself." And I'd smile and hug her and feel that ring in my pocket like a stone, like an anchor, like a lie made physical. Because everything she was proud of was built on blood. Every dollar that impressed her had been earned through suffering I'd caused or ordered. I was a monster wearing the skin of the son she'd raised, and she couldn't see it, or maybe she didn't want to see it. The violence was the hardest part to reconcile. When you're running an organization, you can't do everything yourself, you have to delegate, which means you're giving orders that result in people getting hurt or killed, but you're not the one pulling the trigger. You're not the one swinging the bat. Does that make it better? Worse? I still don't know. I ordered my first killing when I was 22, a rival dealer who'd been moving into my territory who'd refused to back off after multiple warnings. I told my lieutenant to handle it, and he did. The guy turned up in an alley 2 days later with 2 bullets in the back of his head. I didn't pull the trigger, but I might as well have. The blood was on my hands regardless. I started having nightmares around then. Dreams where my mother would find out what I really was, what I really did. She'd look at me with these heartbroken eyes and ask why I'd become this, why I'd broken my promise, why I'd let the streets win. I'd wake up in cold sweats in the penthouse apartment I'd bought in downtown Chicago, surrounded by luxury I'd paid for with other people's pain, and I'd reach for the ring. Still in my pocket, always in my pocket, no matter how expensive my suits got or how far I moved from the South Side. So I'd hold it and remember who I'd promised to be, and then I'd put it back and go on being who I'd become. My mother's health declined again when I was 25. The pneumonia had left her lungs scarred, and years of hard labor had broken her body down. She couldn't work anymore, could barely climb stairs without getting winded. I moved her into a nice apartment in a better neighborhood, hired a home health aide to check on her, made sure she had everything she needed. She protested, said it was too much, that she didn't need charity even from her own son, but I insisted. It was the least I could do, the very least, considering what I'd become while telling myself it was all for her. She settled into her new place, and I visited every Sunday religiously. Those visits were the only time I felt halfway human, sitting at her kitchen table, eating her cooking, pretending to be the successful, legitimate businessman she thought I was. One Sunday, she was particularly reflective. She'd been looking at old photographs, pictures from when I was a kid, when we were poor but together, when the world was simpler even if it was harder. She looked at me and said, "Marcus, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. I started to give her the automatic answer, the lie, but something in her eyes stopped me. She'd always been able to see through my bullshit, even when she chose to ignore it. I said, "I don't know, Mama. I don't know if I even remember what happy feels like, but I'm successful. Isn't that what matters?" She was quiet for a long moment, then she said, "Success without happiness is just another kind of poverty, baby. I didn't raise you to be rich. I raised you to be good, to be kind. To be the kind of man who makes the world a little bit better by being in it. Are you that man?" The ring in my pocket felt like it was burning through my leg. I wanted to pull it out, to give it back to her, to confess everything and beg for forgiveness. But I couldn't, the words wouldn't come. Instead, I lied again. "I'm trying to be, Mama, every day I'm trying." She smiled, but it was sad, and I think maybe she knew. Maybe she'd always known. Maybe mothers just see their children clearly no matter how many masks they wear. The empire I'd built started showing cracks around my 27th birthday. Federal investigations were circling, rivals were getting bolder, and the violence was escalating to a point where even I was uncomfortable. I'd ordered things, sanctioned things that I couldn't take back. Bodies were piling up. The police were paying attention. My legitimate business associates were starting to ask questions. I needed to either go completely legitimate or double down on the criminal enterprise. I chose the latter, stupid in retrospect, but I'd come too far, built too much to walk away. Besides, what would I even be if I walked away? I'd never developed any real skills besides survival and manipulation. The streets were all I knew. I was 28 when I met Detective Sarah Morrison. She was working organized crime, had been building a case against me for over a year, and she was good. Really good. She knew things about my operation that even some of my own people didn't know. We had a leak somewhere, someone talking to the feds, and I was scrambling to find them before Morrison could build enough evidence for an indictment. Meanwhile, I was still visiting my mother every Sunday, still playing the role of the dutiful son, still carrying her ring in my pocket like a talisman against the evil I'd become. The irony wasn't lost on me. The walls started closing in faster than I'd anticipated. Detective Morrison wasn't just good, she was relentless, and she had resources I couldn't match. She started picking off my associates one by one, offering them deals, turning them against me. My attorney, a sharp woman named Rebecca Chen who specialized in defending people like me, told me I needed to prepare for the worst. Either I was going to prison for a very long time or I was going to have to disappear. Neither option was acceptable. Prison would destroy my mother. Disappearing would destroy my mother. I was trapped by my own success, by the empire I'd built to prove I wasn't the poor kid from the South Side anymore. My mother's 60th birthday was approaching, and I wanted to do something special. She'd never had a real party, never had people make a fuss over her. So I rented out a nice restaurant, invited everyone who mattered to her, the few friends she'd made in her new building, some distant relatives, people from her church that she'd started attending since she stopped working. It was beautiful. She was beautiful, wearing a new dress I'd bought her, smiling and laughing in a way I hadn't seen in years. During the party, she pulled me aside and said, "Marcus, thank you for this. Thank you for everything you've done for me. I know I haven't always been easy to care for. I know I was so focused on surviving when you were little that I didn't always see you. But you turned out perfect anyway. You're everything I dreamed you'd be." The guilt nearly killed me right there. Standing in that restaurant, watching her look at me with such love and pride, knowing that everything she was proud of was a lie, that I was weeks away from potentially being arrested, that the man she thought I was didn't exist and never had. I wanted to tell her. Wanted to confess everything, to pull out her ring and admit I'd broken every promise I'd ever made to her. But I couldn't do it, couldn't break her heart like that. So I hugged her and said, "I love you, Mama. Everything I am, everything I have, it's because of you." Which was true and false in equal measure. I was a monster because of circumstances, but I'd chosen to stay a monster because it was easier than being anything else. The arrest came 2 weeks later. The federal agents hit 3 of my properties simultaneously, dawn raids with enough firepower to invade a small country. I wasn't at any of them, had been tipped off hours earlier by a cop on my payroll, but they still picked me up later that day when I turned myself in with Rebecca Chen at my side. The charges were extensive. Racketeering, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, money laundering, witness tampering, conspiracy to commit murder. They had me dead to rights on most of it, thanks to Morrison's work and the testimony of people I'd trusted. My bail was set at $5 million, which I could afford, but the conditions were strict. No contact with known associates, no leaving the state, ankle monitor, the works. The media coverage was brutal. Philanthropist revealed as drug kingpin. South Side success story actually crime boss. Marcus Donovan's empire built on blood. My mother saw it all. She called me the day after my arrest, and I could hear in her voice that something had broken. She didn't ask if the charges were true. She didn't need to. She'd always known, I think, on some level. Had chosen to believe the lie because the truth was too painful. But now the truth was everywhere, impossible to ignore. She said, Marcus, I need you to tell me something, and I need you to be honest for once in your life. Did you do these things they're saying? Did you hurt people? Did you sell drugs that destroyed families? Did you become everything I begged you not to become? I'd lied to her so many times. About the money, about my work, about who I was. But I couldn't lie about this. Not anymore. I said, yes, Mama, I did all of it. I've been doing it since I was 8 years old. Everything you're proud of, everything you thought I'd built, it's all blood money. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I was trying to save us, trying to make sure you never cried on the kitchen floor again, but I became a monster instead. I broke my promise to you. I broke everything. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then she said very quietly, don't come to see me anymore, Marcus. I can't look at you right now. Maybe not ever. You weren't trying to save us. You were trying to save yourself from feeling powerless. And you destroyed everything good in the process, including yourself. Then she hung up. That was the last conversation we had. She refused my calls after that, sent back the money I tried to give her, moved to a smaller apartment and got a part-time job doing light cleaning work even though it was hard on her health. She wanted nothing from me, nothing touched by what I'd become. The trial took 18 months to start. During that time, I tried everything to reach her. Letters she returned unopened, gifts she sent back, messages through mutual friends she ignored. She'd cut me out of her life completely, and I couldn't blame her. I'd broken her heart in the most fundamental way possible. The woman who'd sacrificed everything for me, who'd worked herself to the bone to give me a chance at something better, and I'd used that sacrifice as an excuse to become exactly what she'd feared. The ring was still in my pocket, but it didn't feel like a promise anymore. It felt like an accusation, a reminder of everything I destroyed. Rebecca Chen did her best, but the evidence was overwhelming. Morrison had built an airtight case. Multiple witnesses, financial records, wiretaps, surveillance footage. My only real option was to take a plea deal. 15 years in federal prison in exchange for cooperation against some of my former associates, people higher up the food chain who I'd done business with. It was a betrayal, but what did I have left to lose? My empire was gone. My money was frozen. My mother wanted nothing to do with me. I took the deal. The judge sentenced me on a cold Tuesday in February. I was 30 years old, looking at getting out when I was 45 if I behaved, losing the best years of my life to pay for the worst choices I'd ever made. Federal prison is different from what you see in movies. It's not constant violence and gangs running wild, at least not where they sent me. It's boredom. Soul-crushing, mind-numbing boredom punctuated by moments of tension and the constant knowledge that you're trapped. That time is slipping away, that the world is moving on without you. I fell into a routine, work my assigned job in the prison library, work out to keep from going crazy, read everything I could get my hands on and think. I did a lot of thinking in those early years. About my mother. About the choices I'd made. About who I'd been and who I might have become if I'd chosen differently at key moments. Make sure you're subscribed because the next part of this story is where everything changes in ways you won't expect. Comment below with your name and city. I want to know this is reaching people. I tried writing to my mother from prison. Every week for the first year, I'd send her a letter. Telling her about my days, about the books I was reading, about how sorry I was, about how I was trying to become someone better even if it was too late. She never responded, not once. I'd ask other family members who still talked to me about her and they'd say she was doing okay, managing, getting by, but she wouldn't talk about me. It was like I'd died. Maybe in her mind I had. The son she'd raised, the boy who'd promised to make something of himself, was gone. I'd killed him. And the man who remained wasn't someone she wanted to know. In year 3 of my sentence, I got news that changed everything. My mother had collapsed at work. She'd been cleaning an office building and her heart had just given out. By the time the paramedics arrived, she'd suffered massive damage. She was alive but barely in ICU on machines that were keeping her breathing. I petitioned for compassionate release to see her. The request was denied. I petitioned again, denied again. I wasn't considered low risk and my crime had been too serious. I was going to lose her without ever being able to say goodbye, without ever being able to give her back the ring, without ever being able to show her I'd heard what she said, that I understood what I'd become. The helplessness was suffocating. She died on a Sunday morning in May, 3 weeks after her collapse. I was sitting in the prison chapel not because I was religious but because it was quiet there and one of the guards came to tell me. My mother was gone. The woman who'd raised me, who'd sacrificed everything for me, who'd loved me even when I didn't deserve it, was gone. And I was locked in a cage, unable to even attend her funeral. They let me make a phone call. I called the funeral home, made arrangements, paid for everything with money from an account that hadn't been seized because it was in my mother's name. Then I went back to my cell and cried for the first time since I was a child, not the quiet, dignified tears of an adult. The loud, ugly, broken sobbing of someone who's lost everything and knows it's their own fault. Her funeral was small. A few people from her church, some neighbors, distant relatives. I got reports from my cousin Denise, who was kind enough to send me photos and tell me what happened. My mother was buried in a simple casket in a modest plot with a headstone that read Sarah Donovan, beloved mother, woman of faith, gone too soon. No mention of me. I hadn't earned a place in her remembrance. Denise told me that during the service, the pastor had talked about my mother's strength, her perseverance, her faith despite hardship. He mentioned she had a son but said nothing more about me. I was a blank space in her story, an absence. Maybe that was fitting. The grief hollowed me out. For months I was just going through the motions, existing but not living. Other inmates gave me space, recognized that something fundamental had broken in me. I stopped writing letters to nobody, stopped reading, stopped caring about anything. I was serving time, waiting for it to end, but I had nothing to go back to, no family. No purpose, just the ring in my pocket, which prison officials had let me keep because it had no monetary value, which I'd carried through intake and cell searches and transfers because it was all I had left of the woman I'd destroyed. Then, in year 5 of my sentence, something unexpected happened. I was working in the library shelving books when another inmate approached me. His name was Thomas Wright, mid-50s, quiet guy who kept to himself. He said, "Donovan Wright. I heard about your mother. I'm sorry for your loss. My mother died while I was in here too. It's the hardest thing." We started talking. He told me his story. Businessman who'd gotten involved in fraud to save his failing company ended up here for securities violations. He'd used his time to educate himself, to plan for when he got out. He ran a class in the prison teaching financial literacy and business planning to inmates who were serious about going straight. He asked if I wanted to join. I almost said no. What was the point? But I had nothing else to do, and something about Thomas reminded me of who I might have been in a different life. So I started attending his classes. At first, I was just going through the motions, but Thomas was a good teacher, passionate about giving guys like us a second chance. He taught us about legitimate business, about building something real instead of something criminal. About integrity and ethics and all the things I'd abandoned when I was 8 years old and desperate to save my mother. I started paying attention. Started thinking about what I could build when I got out, if I ever had another chance. Thomas and I became friends, as much as you can be friends in prison. He pushed me to think bigger, to use the intelligence I'd wasted on criminal enterprise for something legitimate. He'd ask me questions about my old operation, not the criminal parts but the business strategy. How I'd structured things, how I'd managed people, how I'd grown from nothing into something significant. He'd say, "Marcus, you've got a brilliant mind for business. Imagine what you could have built if you'd applied that legally. It's not too late, you're going to get out someday. What are you going to build then?" I didn't have an answer, but he made me start thinking about the question. Years 6 through 10 in prison were different from the first 5. I had purpose again, direction. Thomas's classes evolved into a full program and I started helping him teach, sharing what I knew about business and management and strategy, carefully edited to remove the criminal elements. We helped dozens of guys prepare for release, taught them how to write business plans, how to apply for small business loans, how to market themselves to employers who might be willing to hire ex-cons. It felt good, not redemptive exactly. I couldn't redeem what I'd done, but useful. Like maybe I could help other people avoid the mistakes I'd made. I got my GED in year 7, which was ridiculous considering I probably could have tested out of it when I was 15, but I'd never finished high school officially. Then I started taking college courses through a prison program, online classes in business administration. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was learning legitimately what I'd already mastered illegitimately. But there was something satisfying about it, about proving to myself that I could do it the right way. My mother had wanted me to go to college, better late than never, I guess, even if she wasn't around to see it. The ring stayed in my pocket through all of it. Sometimes I'd take it out and look at it, this cheap little piece of silver that had survived prison intake because nobody thought it was worth styling, and I'd remember my mother's face when she gave it to me. "When you're successful, when you've made it out of here, I want you to give this back to me." I'd made it out in a sense, made it to the top of a criminal empire. But I'd never given her the ring back because that wasn't the kind of success she'd meant. She'd wanted me to be good, to be legitimate, to be proud of myself. And I'd failed her so completely that she died without speaking to me. The ring was supposed to be a symbol of a promise kept. Instead, it was a reminder of everything I'd lost. In year 11, I got some unexpected news. Thomas was being released early, time served with good behavior. He'd done 12 years of a 15-year sentence and he was getting out. Before he left, he pulled me aside and said, "Marcus, when you get out, look me up. I'm starting a consulting firm helping ex-cons transition back into society, find legitimate work, start businesses. I want you to work with me. You've got skills, intelligence, drive. Use them right this time. Promise me you'll at least think about it." I promised. It was the first promise I'd made since my mother died that I actually intended to keep. 3 more years crawled by. I kept teaching, kept learning, kept preparing for a release that felt both inevitable and impossible. What was I going to do on the outside? I was 43 years old, had spent 13 years in prison, had no real work history that I could put on a legitimate resume, had burned every bridge I'd ever built in my old life. But I had Thomas's offer. I had education now, degrees earned through correspondence that might mean something. I had time served that might have taught me something about who I didn't want to be. Maybe that was enough. Maybe it had to be. They released me on a Tuesday morning in October, early enough that the sun was just coming up over the prison walls. I walked out with a bag containing my few possessions, $2,000 gate money, and my mother's ring still in my pocket where it had lived for 20 years. The world had changed while I was inside. Smartphones were everywhere, social media dominated everything. The South Side looked different when I drove through it on my way to the halfway house where I'd be staying. But some things hadn't changed. Poverty, desperation. Kids on corners who reminded me of myself at 8 years old making choices they thought would save them that would actually destroy them. The cycle continued. I was just one person who'd fallen off it. The halfway house was exactly as depressing as you'd imagine. Small rooms, strict rules, curfews, random drug tests. I was 43 years old and living like a teenager, checking in with a case manager, getting permission to go to job interviews, being monitored constantly. But it was better than prison. Anything was better than prison. I called Thomas the second day I was out. He was thrilled to hear from me, invited me to his office for an interview. The consulting firm he'd started was small but growing, helping former inmates navigate reentry, teaching them skills, connecting them with employers willing to give second chances. It was legitimate, completely clean, the kind of business that made the world a little bit better. The kind of business my mother would have been proud of. Thomas hired me on the spot. The pay wasn't great, certainly nothing like what I'd made running my criminal empire, but it was honest money. I'd be working with clients, teaching classes, developing curriculum, basically doing what I'd been doing in prison but for people on the outside. He said, "Marcus, I'm taking a chance on you. A lot of people wouldn't given your history, but I've seen you work. I know you're committed to changing. Don't make me regret this." I promised I wouldn't. Another promise. I was collecting them like debts, these commitments to be better, to do better, to somehow balance out the scales of everything I'd destroyed. Within 6 months, I'd moved out of the halfway house into a small studio apartment in a neighborhood I didn't know. Nothing fancy. A bed, a desk, a small kitchen. But it was mine, paid for with legitimate money, and there was something powerful about that. I kept my mother's ring in a dish on the desk, looked at it every morning when I woke up. A reminder, a memorial, a promise I could never fulfill but refused to abandon. I started volunteering at a youth center on the South Side, mentoring kids who were in the same situation I'd been in at their age, trying to show them there were options besides the streets, trying to prevent them from making the mistakes I'd made. It felt like penance, necessary but never enough. My reputation followed me, of course. Once people realized I was Marcus Donovan, the Marcus Donovan who'd run a criminal empire and gone down in a spectacular federal case, they had opinions. Some people were hostile, thought I didn't deserve a second chance, thought I should have stayed in prison forever. Others were curious, wanted to hear war stories from the streets, treated me like some kind of celebrity. I hated both reactions equally. I wasn't proud of what I'd been, but I wasn't going to pretend it hadn't happened either. It was part of my story, the darkest chapter, but still mine. I was 45 years old, working at Thomas's firm, living in my studio apartment, trying to build something resembling a normal life, when I got a phone call that changed everything again. It was my cousin Denise, who I hadn't spoken to in years. She said, "Marcus, I need to talk to you about your mother's estate. There are some things we need to settle, some papers to sign. Can you come by?" I was confused. My mother had died 7 years ago. What estate? She'd been poor when she died, living in a small apartment, working part-time. What was there to settle? Denise met me at a coffee shop near her house in the suburbs. She looked older, tired, like life had worn her down the same way it wore everyone down. She handed me an envelope and said, "Your mother left this for you. She gave it to me before she died, made me promise not to give it to you until you'd been out of prison for at least a year. She said if you were still trying, still working at being better, then you'd earn the right to read it. So here it is." My hands shook as I took the envelope, my mother's handwriting on the front, "To Marcus with love always." I couldn't open it there, not in front of Denise, not in public. I took it home, sat at my desk with my mother's ring in front of me, and finally opened the envelope. The letter was dated 2 weeks before she died, written in her careful cursive that I recognized from every birthday card and note she'd ever left me. It said, "Dear Marcus, if you're reading this, it means you survived prison. It means you're trying to build a real life. I'm proud of you for that, baby, even though I was too angry and too hurt to tell you when I was alive. You broke my heart. Not because you were a criminal, though that was terrible, but because you lied to me for so long. Because you let me believe in a version of you that didn't exist. Because you used my love as a shield for your guilt instead of as a reason to change. The letter continued, but I understand why you did it. I was there that day you saw me crying over the eviction notice. I saw something in your eyes change that day, saw you decide you were going to save me. And you did in your way. You kept us fed and housed and safe, even if the methods were wrong. You were 8 years old and trying to solve an adult problem with a child's understanding of the world. I don't forgive what you became, but I understand how you got there. And I'm sorry I didn't see it happening. I'm sorry I was so tired and so overwhelmed that I missed my little boy turning into someone I didn't recognize. There was more. I want you to know something, Marcus. That ring I gave you, that cheap little piece of silver I was so proud of, it's not the symbol I meant it to be. The real symbol is the promise itself, the commitment to be better than your circumstances, the choice to use your intelligence and your drive for good instead of evil. You can't give me the ring back, baby, I'm gone, but you can keep the promise. You can be the man I always believed you could be. You can make the world better instead of worse. That's all I ever wanted for you, not money, not success, just goodness, just integrity, just the strength to choose right over easy. As the letter ended, I love you, Marcus. I always have, even when I was too angry to say it, even when I cut you out of my life. You were my son, my baby, the best thing I ever created. And I believe even now that there's good in you, that the boy who tried to save his mother is still there somewhere under all the mistakes and the violence and the regret. Find him, baby, bring him back, make him into the man I dreamed you'd be. That's how you give me the ring back. That's how you keep your promise. I love you always, Mama. I sat there in my studio apartment, 45 years old, crying like a child, holding a letter from a woman who'd been dead for 7 years and had somehow forgiven me even though I didn't deserve it. The ring sat on the desk in front of me, and for the first time since she'd given it to me, I understood what it really meant. It wasn't about success or money or escaping poverty. It was about becoming someone worth respecting. Someone who made the world better by being in it. Someone good. Drop a comment with your name and city if this story is hitting home. We're getting close to the twist that explains the title, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. I threw myself into the work at Thomas's firm after reading my mother's letter. It became more than just a job. It became a mission. As every client I helped, every kid I mentored, every guy fresh out of prison that I could point toward legitimate opportunities, it felt like I was honoring my mother's memory, keeping the promise in the way she'd meant it. Thomas noticed the change in my energy, my commitment. Within a year, he made me a partner in the firm. We renamed it Wright Donovan Reentry Services, my name on legitimate business cards, on a website, on an office door. It felt surreal. The business grew. We secured grants, partnered with government agencies, built relationships with employers who were willing to hire people with records. I developed a reputation as someone who understood the criminal world intimately, but had genuinely committed to helping people escape it. I spoke at conferences, wrote articles, appeared on local news programs talking about criminal justice reform. It was everything my mother had wanted for me, achieved 30 years too late through a path I wouldn't wish on anyone. But it was real, it was honest, it was mine. I was 47 when I met James Wright, no relation to Thomas despite the shared last name. James was a billionaire, old money from Chicago's financial district, but he'd made his own fortune too, building on his family's legacy in ways that were innovative and impressive. He'd reached out to our firm because he wanted to start a program hiring ex-cons for positions in his various businesses. Not charity jobs, real positions with real responsibilities. He'd heard me speak at a criminal justice conference and wanted to discuss collaboration. We met at his office in a skyscraper downtown, the kind of building I used to see from the South Side and dream about conquering through criminal means. Now I was walking in through the front door with a legitimate business card. James was in his 60s, distinguished, with silver hair and the kind of presence that comes from a lifetime of power. But he wasn't arrogant. He listened when I talked, asked intelligent questions, seemed genuinely committed to making a difference. We developed a partnership. His companies would hire vetted candidates from our program, we'd provide ongoing support and counseling, and together we'd prove that people deserved second chances. It worked beautifully. Within 2 years, we'd placed over 200 formerly incarcerated individuals in good jobs. Some of them thrived, working their way up in James's organizations, becoming success stories we could point to when skeptics questioned whether people could really change. James and I became friends, unlikely as that seemed. Sometimes he'd invite me to his house in the suburbs, a mansion so large it was almost obscene, and we'd talk about everything from business to philosophy to our respective journeys. He'd been born into privilege but had earned his success through genuine merit. I'd been born into poverty and had tried to escape through crime before finally finding a legitimate path. We were opposites in many ways, but we shared a belief that people were more than their worst moments, that everyone deserved a chance to prove they could be better. One evening, James invited me to a charity gala his family was hosting, some fundraiser for educational programs in underserved neighborhoods. I almost declined. Galas weren't my scene, and I'd spent enough time pretending to be someone I wasn't during my criminal days, but James insisted. He wanted me there to speak about our reentry program to help raise money for expansion. So I rented a tuxedo, the first one I'd worn since before prison, and showed up at the Palmer House Hilton feeling completely out of place among Chicago's elite. The gala was exactly what you'd expect. Wealthy people in expensive clothes, drinking champagne, writing checks to feel good about themselves. I tried not to be cynical. These people were donating money to help kids like I'd been. That mattered even if their motivations were complex. I gave my speech, talked about second chances and the importance of supporting reentry programs, and people seemed genuinely moved. Several approached me afterward wanting to donate or learn more about our work. It felt good. Legitimate. Like maybe I was finally becoming the person my mother had believed I could be. I was at the bar getting a drink when I saw her. The maid. She was older, maybe in her 60s, African American, wearing the uniform of the catering staff hired for the event. She was clearing glasses from a nearby table, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent a lifetime in service work. Something about her was familiar, the way she moved, the shape of her face. And then I saw her hand as she reached for a champagne flute, and my heart stopped. On her finger was a ring, a cheap silver band with a small blue stone, my mother's ring. The ring I'd kept in my pocket for 20 years through everything that I'd only stopped carrying a few years ago when I'd put it in a safe place in my apartment. Except it couldn't be my mother's ring because that one was safe at home, but it was identical, exactly the same. I walked over to her without thinking, my heart pounding, and said, "Excuse me, ma'am, that ring you're wearing, where did you get it?" She looked up at me, startled, her hand instinctively going to protect the ring. Up close, I could see she was probably 65 with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She said, "This ring, it was my sister's. She passed away 7 years ago. Why do you ask?" My throat closed up. 7 years ago, the same time my mother died. But this woman wasn't my mother's sister. My mother didn't have siblings. She'd been an only child. I managed to say, "Your sister. What was her name?" The woman looked at me suspiciously, clearly wondering why some man in a tuxedo was interrogating her about jewelry at a fancy gala. But something in my face must have conveyed the importance because she answered, "Sarah, Sarah Donovan." She was more like a sister than a friend. We worked together for years, cleaning houses and offices. She was the best woman I ever knew. When she died, she left me this ring. Said it meant something special to her, but she wanted me to have it because I'd always been there for her. Why did you know Sarah? The room was spinning. This woman had known my mother, had worked with her, had been close enough that my mother gave her the ring I thought I still had at home, except clearly there were two rings, or I'd misunderstood something fundamental about my entire life. I said Sarah Donovan was my mother. The woman's eyes went wide. She stepped back like I'd slapped her. You're Marcus, Sarah's son Marcus, I nodded. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Horror, maybe, or pity, she said. Sarah talked about you, not often, especially at the end. But she told me about you, what you'd become, what you'd done. She was heartbroken, but she never stopped loving you even when she said she couldn't forgive you. I felt like I was going to be sick. This stranger had known my mother in ways I hadn't, had been with her during the years when she'd cut me out of her life. Had been there when I wasn't. I said, the ring, I have one just like it. I thought my mother only had one ring, that cheap thing she bought at a pawn shop. How are there two? The woman smiled, sad and knowing. Marcus, honey, your mother didn't buy that ring at a pawn shop. I bought two of them, one for her and one for me, when we both finally saved enough money to afford something pretty. We called them our friendship rings. Sarah wore hers every day until she gave it to you, told me about the promise she made you make. Then a few years later, she bought another one just like it, wore that instead, said she needed the symbol even if the promise was broken. When she knew she was dying, she gave it to me, said to keep it safe to remember her by. The information was coming too fast. My mother had replaced the ring, had kept the symbol for herself even after giving me the original. Had maintained her hope or her grief through this cheap piece of jewelry that meant more than gold. I said, do you still talk to anyone from back then? Anyone who knew my mother? The woman nodded slowly. There's a group of us ladies who all work together who have kept in touch over the years. We meet once a month, usually at someone's house. Why? I didn't have a good answer. What was I going to say? That I needed to meet these women who'd known my mother, who'd been her friends and confidants during the years I was in prison, during the years she'd cut me out. That I was desperate for any connection to her, any way to understand the woman she'd been when I wasn't there to lie to her. Instead, I just said, I'd like to know more about my mother's life, the parts I missed. Would you be willing to talk to me, maybe introduce me to the others who knew her? The woman studied me for a long moment. Then she said, my name is Dorothy Hayes, I'll think about it. If Sarah's other friends want to meet you, I'll let you know. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. Your mother loved you more than anything in this world, but you destroyed her. What you did, who you became, it broke something in her that never healed. If you're looking for forgiveness or closure or whatever, I don't know if meeting us will give you that. We can tell you about Sarah, the woman she was, the friend she was to us. But we can't give you back the years you lost or undo the pain you caused. She was right, of course. Nothing could undo what I'd done, but I needed to know, needed to understand the woman my mother had been when she wasn't being the strong one for me, when she was just herself with her friends. I gave Dorothy my card, the legitimate business card with my real contact information, and asked her to call me if she decided to share. She took it, looked at it, and something like surprise crossed her face. Right, Donovan Reentry Services, you work in criminal justice reform? I nodded. I run the company, helping people coming out of prison find legitimate work, build real lives. It's what my mother would have wanted me to do, what I should have done from the beginning. Dorothy's expression softened slightly. Sarah would have been proud of that, maybe not proud enough to forgive you, but proud, that's something. Then she went back to clearing tables, and I went back to the gala, but everything felt different. The night continued around me, people talking and laughing and writing checks, but I was somewhere else entirely, thinking about my mother, about rings and promises, about the life she'd lived that I'd never fully understood. Dorothy called me 2 weeks later. The other women had agreed to meet me cautiously, with the understanding that they owed me nothing and could end the conversation at any time if I made them uncomfortable. We met at Dorothy's house, a small bungalow on the south side not far from where I'd grown up. There were 5 women total, all in their 60s, all having spent their lives in domestic service or similar work. They looked at me with a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and something like sorrow when I walked in. Dorothy introduced me to the group. "Ladies, this is Marcus Donovan, Sarah's son." The reaction was immediate. One woman, whose name was Patricia, actually teared up. Another, Lorraine, looked away like she couldn't stand to see me. A third, Michelle, just stared with unreadable eyes. The fifth woman, Angela, was the one who finally spoke. "Marcus, we agreed to meet you because Dorothy asked us to, because we loved Sarah and we wanted to honor her memory. But before we start sharing stories about your mother, I need to ask you something. Why? Why do you want to know about her life now? Where were you when she was dying? Where were you when she was struggling and alone because her son was in prison for being everything she'd begged him not to be?" The accusations hurt because they were true. I sat down in the chair they'd indicated, aware that I was an outsider here, an intruder in their circle of shared grief and memory. I said I was in prison. I couldn't be there. I tried to get compassionate release to see her, but I was denied. I would have given anything to be there when she died. Anything, but I couldn't, and I know that's my fault. Everything is my fault. I made choices that destroyed her and destroyed any chance I had of being the son she deserved. I'm not here for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that. I'm here because I spent most of my life lying to her, and I want to know the truth about who she really was. The parts of her that I never got to see. The women looked at each other, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Patricia said, "Okay, we'll tell you about Sarah, but you have to understand the woman we knew was different from the woman you knew. She was more herself with us, more honest about her struggles and her disappointments, including her disappointment in you." I nodded. "I understand. Please tell me everything." They did. For the next 3 hours, these women who'd been my mother's friends, her support system, her chosen family during the years I was gone, told me about Sarah Donovan. They told me about the woman who'd shown up to their houses crying after my arrest, heartbroken and ashamed. They told me about the woman who'd worked herself sick trying to return all the money I'd given her over the years, money she couldn't bring herself to spend once she knew where it came from. They told me about the woman who'd prayed every night that I'd somehow find my way back to being the person she'd raised, even when she didn't think it was possible. They told me about the woman who died quietly in a hospital bed, surrounded by friends instead of family, whispering my name even though she'd claimed she wanted nothing to do with me. Dorothy told me something that broke me all over again. 2 days before Sarah died, she was in and out of consciousness, but she had this moment of clarity. She grabbed my hand and said, "Dorothy, if Marcus ever gets out, if he ever tries to be better, I need you to give him my ring, the one I'm wearing. And tell him I kept my promise even if he couldn't keep his. Tell him I made something of myself. Not in the way the world measures success, but in the way that matters. I was kind, I was honest. I helped people, I was good. Tell him that's what making it means. And if he can do that, if he can be good even after everything he's done, then the promise isn't broken, it's just delayed. That's why I was wearing the ring at the gala. I was keeping it safe until you proved you deserved it." I couldn't speak, couldn't process. My mother had forgiven me, or had she just understood me? I didn't know which was more overwhelming. Dorothy continued, "Sarah loved you, Marcus, even when she hated what you'd become. Even when she couldn't stand to look at you or speak to you, she never stopped being your mother, never stopped hoping you'd find your way back. That ring on my finger, it's your mother's legacy, her belief that people can change, that promises can be kept even when they're broken first. The question is, have you kept it? Have you become the person she believed you could be?" I thought about the last 7 years, the work I'd done, the people I'd helped, the legitimate life I'd built. I thought about Thomas's firm, about James Wright's partnership, about the hundreds of people who'd found second chances because of programs I developed. I thought about the kids I mentored, trying to keep them off the streets I'd once ruled. I thought about the man I'd become versus the monster I'd been. And I said, I don't know if I'm good. I don't know if I'll ever be able to call myself that after what I did. But I'm trying. Every single day, I'm trying to be the man my mother wanted me to be, to make the world better instead of worse, to be honest and kind and helpful. I'm trying. Dorothy stood up, walked over to where I was sitting, and did something I didn't expect. She pulled the ring off her finger and placed it in my palm, closing my fingers around it. Then you've earned this, not because you're perfect, not because you've made up for what you did, but because you're trying. That's all Sarah wanted, for you to try. To choose good over evil every single day for the rest of your life. That's the promise. That's what it means to give her the ring back. The weight of that ring in my palm was immense, heavier than any burden I'd ever carried. It was identical to the one I had at home, the one my mother had given me 30 years ago when I was 14. But this one was different. This one came with her final message, her final hope, her final act of faith in me. I left Dorothy's house that evening with two rings, two symbols, two promises, one I'd made as a child and broken spectacularly, one I was making now as a man and would spend the rest of my life trying to keep. When I got home to my studio apartment, I placed both rings on my desk side by side, cheap silver bands with small blue stones that looked like glass, worth nothing to anyone else, worth everything to me. I understood now what my mother had been trying to teach me. Success wasn't money, it wasn't power. It wasn't empire or status or respect earned through fear. It was being good, being kind, being someone who made the world a little bit better by existing in it. I'd spent 25 years learning that lesson the hard way, but I'd learned it. The work at Wright Donovan continued to grow. We expanded to other cities, developed new programs, helped thousands of people find their way back from the edge. James Wright became not just a partner but a friend, someone who believed in second chances and put his money where his mouth was. I spoke at conferences, trained other organizations, became known as an expert in criminal justice reform. People who knew my history were sometimes uncomfortable with my success, thought I didn't deserve it. They weren't wrong. I didn't deserve it, but I was trying to earn it every single day. I started a new tradition. Once a month, I'd visit my mother's grave. I'd bring flowers, sit by her headstone, and tell her about the work I was doing, about the people I'd helped, about the man I was trying to become. I'd touch the ring I wore now on a chain around my neck, her ring, the one she'd worn until she died, and I'd promise her again. Promise I'd keep trying. Promise I'd keep choosing good. Promise I'd honor her memory by being the man she'd believed I could be. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to make up for the pain I'd caused, but it was what I had. 3 years after meeting Dorothy and the other women, I got a call from James Wright. He had an opportunity he wanted to discuss. He was starting a new foundation, specifically focused on supporting children of incarcerated parents, helping them avoid the mistakes their parents made, giving them resources and mentorship and hope. He wanted me to run it. The salary would be substantial, the impact would be enormous, and the position would put me in direct contact with kids just like I'd been, vulnerable, desperate, one bad choice away from a life in the streets. I said yes immediately. It was perfect. It was exactly what my mother would have wanted me to do. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. The conclusion is coming, and you need to see how all of this comes together. Drop your name and city in the comments. Let's build this community together. The foundation launched 6 months later. We called it the Sarah Donovan Foundation, named after my mother with her story as the inspiration. A woman who'd worked herself to the bone to give her son a chance, who'd believed in him even when he didn't deserve it, who died hoping he'd become better. The press coverage was extensive. People wanted to know about Sarah Donovan, this woman who'd inspired a billionaire and a reformed criminal to join forces helping at-risk youth. I told her story honestly. The poverty, the struggle, the sacrifice, the son who'd betrayed everything she stood for, the forgiveness she'd offered anyway, the promise that had finally been kept decades too late but kept nonetheless. We helped hundreds of kids in the first year alone. Mentorship programs, college scholarships, job training, counseling. It's everything designed to give children of incarcerated parents the support system they needed to avoid their parents' mistakes. I worked directly with many of them, shared my story, showed them the consequences of choosing crime even for good reasons. Some of them listened, some didn't, but we tried. We tried with every single one. I was 52 years old, running a successful foundation, living in a modest apartment I could actually afford with legitimate income when I got word that Detective Sarah Morrison had died. The woman who'd built the case against me, who'd sent me to prison, who'd ended my criminal empire. She'd retired from the police force years ago, but she'd stayed in touch with some of my old associates, kept tabs on me apparently. When she died, her family found a letter she'd written to me, asked if I wanted it. I said yes. The letter was short. Marcus Donovan, I spent years of my life hunting you. I saw you as everything wrong with this city, a predator in a suit, someone who destroyed communities for profit. I wanted to see you in prison for the rest of your life, but I've followed your work since you got out. The reentry program, the foundation, the lives you've changed. I don't know if people can be redeemed. I'm a cop. I've seen too much to believe in easy redemption, but I believe in change, and you've changed. That has to count for something. I hope you keep doing the work. I hope you keep proving me right about second chances. Sarah Morrison. I kept that letter with my mother's rings, 3 symbols now, the promise made, the promise broken, the promise kept. They sat on my desk in my office at the foundation, visible every day when I worked. Reminders of where I'd come from, what I'd done, who I'd become. I wasn't a good man. I'd done too much, hurt too many people, destroyed too many lives. But I was trying to be better, trying to balance the scales even though I knew they'd never be balanced. Trying to honor my mother's belief that I could be more than my circumstances, more than my worst choices, more than the monster I'd been. Now I'm 55 years old. The Sarah Donovan Foundation is thriving, helping thousands of kids avoid the path I took. I still run Right Donovan Reentry Services with Thomas, still help people coming out of prison find legitimate paths forward. I still mentor kids on the South Side, still tell my story as a warning and a hope. I still visit my mother's grave once a month, still talk to her like she can hear me, still promise her I'll keep trying. The rings are always with me, either in my pocket or around my neck. Physical proof that promises matter, that change is possible, that it's never too late to try to be better. The Black Mafia billionaire, that's what some people call me, especially journalists who like dramatic headlines. I'm not a billionaire, not even close, but I work with one. And I used to run a criminal empire that could have made me one if I'd stayed that path. But that's not who I am anymore. I'm Marcus Donovan, son of Sarah Donovan, running a foundation in her name, trying to keep a promise I broke 30 years ago, trying to be the man she always believed I could be. The ring on my finger, her ring, is proof that she never gave up on me, even when she should have. Even when I'd given her every reason to, she believed I could change. And that belief saved me when nothing else could. If you're watching this and you're struggling with your own choices, your own path, your own mistakes, I want you to know something. It's not too late. It's never too late to choose differently, to be better, to honor the people who believed in you by becoming the person they saw in you. My mother gave me a cheap ring and asked me to make something of myself. I failed her spectacularly for decades, but her belief in me never died even after she did. And that belief became my foundation for rebuilding everything I destroyed. Find the people who believe in you, honor them, keep your promises to them, even if you break them first, even if it takes decades, even if it seems impossible. Keep trying. That's all any of us can do. Keep trying to be better than we were yesterday. Keep trying to make the world a little bit better by being in it. Keep trying to keep our promises, even when they seem broken beyond repair. The ring my mother gave me when I was 14 was supposed to symbolize my success, my escape from poverty, my transformation into someone she could be proud of. I thought that meant money and power and status. I was wrong about everything. The real success was becoming someone good, someone kind, someone who helped instead of hurt, someone who built up instead of tore down. That's what the ring meant all along. I just had to lose everything to understand it. Thank you for watching this story. Please subscribe to the channel, leave a comment with your name and where you're watching from. Share this with someone who needs to hear that change is possible, that promises can be kept even after they're broken, that it's never too late to try to be better. We all carry rings, symbols of promises we've made to people we love. The question is, are we keeping them, or are we breaking them while telling ourselves we're doing it for the right reasons? Think about your rings, think about your promises, and then do something about them before it's too late. Before the people who believed in you are gone and all you're left with is regret and a cheap piece of silver that weighs more than the world. I'm Marcus Donovan. This was my story. My mother's ring sits on my finger now where it belongs, where it always should have been. I gave it back to her by becoming the man she believed I could be. It took 30 years of hell, but I finally kept my promise. You can keep yours too, whatever it is. Whoever you promised, start today, start now. It's never too late until it is. Don't let it be too late.